and to not worry too much, be cautious, and as the hadith says, "اعقلها وتوكل على الله," but trust in Allah ultimately. There's just a quick message because we're probably not going to be long here. There's a hadith that many have asked about. I think in regards to the issue of praying in congregation, most organizations and most of the ulama that I trust, at least I think, have come to kind of a unanimous decision that in each place, in each city, there are probably different ordinances right now being demanded, or let's say there's certain things that our local government may demand of us, and we should probably adhere to that. So, in other words, if they demand that we shouldn't meet in groups larger than 50 or sometimes 10, then we should obey that mandate. And if a person feels still the need, and again, this is dependent on what has been asked of us. So if we are told that we cannot gather, for instance, then we're going to have to follow that, as painful as that may be. If we're allowed to, but under the supervision, under this, according again to whatever local government we have, if they are asking us to restrict that gathering to 50 or 10 people, then if people want to pray in a masjid, for instance, then they should abide by that, and they should make sure that also all of the advices that have been given to us, if we are in contact with people outside, which right now really we shouldn't be doing. But if you insist on going to the masjid still after all of that, then be very careful and do the normal things that they advise you to do. Wash your hands and make sure you don't have any physical contact with other people, and keep the prayer short, and so forth and so on. I think most of that information is out there. However, if like some of the ulama I trust have already decided in Chicago that people should avoid it and they should pray at home. In Philadelphia too, I think the same thing is pretty much going on and everywhere right now. They're kind of advising people to stay at home. And Allahu Alam. The situation changes, as we know, very rapidly. So we should be making dua, and we should be focusing right now on ourselves in many ways. That's like right now we're going to have a very brief meeting, so we don't have time really to go through all the things that we should be thinking about. But amongst the many is that all the precautions that we're taking now are necessary, and it's part of the Sharia as well. It's part of the quarantine that the Prophet ﷺ asked people to do when they were hit by plague in certain areas and certain people. When they're hit by plague, then he demanded that they should, people who were there should not leave, and people who were not, and people who have not or are planning to go there should not go. But there's other things to this as well, which is that, of course, after all this is said and done, every one of us should be reflecting on our own mortality, even if we don't get sick, or if we get sick and the symptoms are not that serious that it becomes deadly for us. May Allah protect all of us from anything like that happening. But it doesn't matter. The mortality of us all is a reality that whether it's coronavirus or anything else, we're all going to die. And it doesn't matter really if you look in China how they had to make a makeshift tent for people because they didn't have room in their hospitals, and then the tent fell on the people and they died of that. So here were people who were sick of an illness that could become deadly for them, and that didn't kill them. A tent did. It's just there to show us that doesn't matter. Your appointed time, ajna musamma is your appointed time. It really won't matter how it comes. Now, of course, people probably don't want to die, in a situation where they only have 20% lung capacity. That's understandable. But that's why we make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for protection. And we always ask Allah for afiyah. As I mentioned, I think before, there are certain hadith where the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that amongst the shuhada, amongst those who are given the rank of a martyr, are those who drown. Yet there's other hadith where the Prophet ﷺ gave us or told us to make dua to seek protection from death by drowning. Min al-gharaq. So how do we understand that? That at one breath, the person who dies in such a way, which is really a frightening way, it's one of my fears, if you will. Like, when I think about if I die, I wouldn't want to crash, for instance, in the middle of the ocean on an airplane and drown like that. That'd be pretty frightful. This is a natural human emotion to be fearful of things like that. So, but if the Prophet ﷺ said drowning is a means of shahada, but at the same time he's teaching us to seek refuge from it. And some of the ulama responded by saying, because not everyone can take such a test. And at times, such trials can actually lead someone to kufr, to denial of Allah, of denial, and even somewhat of a, we feel that, why me, for instance. And so it's not everyone can handle such a horrible death. And Allah knows whom He will choose to die or not die of any particular circumstances, and in any particular circumstances, excuse me. But we always want, and we should always ask Allah for things that are in our capacity to handle. And so, having said that, we'll talk about the few hadith that maybe some people had questions about. But also, having said that, that's why we don't want to, for instance, if you feel that it doesn't really matter to me, I'm going to go to the masjid anyhow, fine and good. But if something happens to you, Allah forbid, don't let that be the means of fitna for your iman and faith. So if you do that, and whatever consequences come afterwards, you should be ready for it, right? And if don't be the type of person that happens, and then now all of a sudden you're blaming God, right? You're turning around and you're saying, well, I thought I was being protected, so forth and so on, if that makes sense. So, but go further, we'll address certain hadith that may be, of course, in some people's minds. The more popular one is a hadith of Sahih al-Bukhari. It is a very sound hadith as far as the transmission is concerned. There's two versions in the hadith, particularly in Bukhari. One is just simply La Adwa, which literally translates as there are no such things as contagious diseases. What's interesting, and I'll get to this, the next hadith chronologically, actually, in terms of order, the next hadith in Sahih Bukhari happens to be a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, La yuridu al-mumarridu ala al-musih, which means that a sick person should not pass by, or pass by a healthy person. That's the literal translation. La yuridu al-mumarridu ala al-musih. The literal translation of that is a sick person should not pass by a healthy person, like, right? This what they call now social distancing, right? I think most of us get the gist of the hadith. Now I want you to think about what's interesting is that before that, the hadith that there's no such thing as a contagious disease is mentioned. Then right after the hadith of Bukhari, the Imam Bukhari mentions the hadith that a person who is ill should not pass by the one who is healthy. Something to think about. We'll get back to that for a second. So that kind of alludes to the fact that the hadith, la adwa, that there is no such thing as a contagious disease, is by no way implying that we should be bold enough to put ourselves in situations where we could possibly contract a disease or illness. Because the next hadith clearly states that la yuridu al-mumarridu ala al-musih, a person who is sick should not pass by the one who is healthy. So there should be social, right, distancing. So anyhow, and so what is the meaning of the hadith then? Why would the Prophet say that there's no such thing as a contagious disease? So there's kind of, if you remember all the discussions we had, those of you who participated in the classes of Aqidah, it goes really to that point. And I'll get to that. So because the next version of the hadith is mentioned in a little bit more detail, but the Prophet ﷺ said the same thing, there's no such thing as a contagious disease. And an Arab, a Bedouin stood up and he asked the Prophet that, haven't you seen that some camels, they can have a disease, and then when they're put with the herd, the rest of the herd will contract the same disease. Okay? You see, he asked that question himself. So it's already done for us if anyone had that question. Right. So then the Prophet ﷺ, he asked in response to that question, فَمَنْ أَعْدَ الْأَوْلِ, that who gave the disease to the first camel? In other words, this is in sync with all the things we've been learning in Aqidah so far. That if you go back to the source of anything that happens, it's like an infinite regress until eventually you have to say that, well, who gave this disease in reality is Allah. It is not the camel itself, right? And that's the bottom line of all that we've been learning, is tawheed al-af'al, that things in and of themselves don't cause things to happen. And it's no different for a microbial germ or anything like that. These things, as we know, in their definition of what they are contingent beings who cannot rely on or cannot exist by themselves. They are, like everything else, just the fact that you can so easily get rid of it by washing your hands with soap and water. Obviously, it's not something in and of itself that causes anything to happen. It is Allah who causes everything to happen. And that's what the Prophet ﷺ, by saying that there is no such thing as contagious diseases, that the disease itself is not what makes things happen, is Allah. And that's why he said, who gave the first camel the disease in the first place? In other words, it's a lesson in Aqidah. So how do we understand that? Though with the other hadith, that there should be, if someone is ill, they should not go in contact with someone who's healthy. The idea is this. This is how you reconcile the fact that we say there's no such thing as contagious diseases according to this hadith, and things in and of themselves intrinsically don't cause anything to happen, as we said in Aqidah. But it's simple. They are af'al. These are the acts of God. God creates them for a reason, and God makes them happen for a reason. You don't challenge God by not recognizing what they are, His creation, and they're there for a reason. That is the reason why we would observe this part of the Sunnah, which is quarantine, right, and to have social distancing, so forth and so on, and follow the advice of the people who know about these things. In other words, the experts. If they say right now we can't gather, we can't gather. It's temporary. We should make dua. This is time to reflect on our own situation. Perhaps the reason why I was just mentioning this with a friend of mine, that some of this is happening is because, في بيوت أذن الله أن يرفع فيها اسمه. So these masajid are places where the dhikr of Allah is to be done and His ibadah. Many places, unfortunately, we can say that how much of the remembrance of God do we actually do in these masajid? And I'm not going to point out any particulars, but just really how many of these places that we call masajid are we strictly relegating them to just the remembrance of Allah? We have the masjid is being used for every other purpose under the sun, but how many people are really worshiping God and remembering God in these places? Perhaps it's because of that lack of the true dhikr of Allah in these masajid that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is allowing this to happen to us. So we should ask Allah to forgive us. This is a time of tawbah. We should really think about our own mortality, as I said. And another hadith I would like to mention, it's mentioned in Ibn Majah, his Sunan, that also puts things in perspective of why maybe we take things to heart a little bit too much. The Prophet radiallahu anhu, من جعل الهموم هموما واحدة. Whoever makes all of their concerns into one concern, Hamm al-Ma'ad, that is the concern of meeting Allah. Now again, look at this. If you think that this is a scary situation, just imagine in the day of Qiyamah. Fixate on that for a while if you want to fixate on something. Imagine that. Now, if your concern becomes all of these things, and you take it and you make it the concern of the akhirah, what will Allah do as a result of that? That Allah will be enough for them and all of their concerns of this world. Meaning, focus your concern on something else, which is the akhirah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make all the concerns you have of this world very easy and will be enough for you in the matter of these concerns. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to, lighten the panic that many people are feeling. And remember also, there's the hadith Qudsi Bukhari and others where the Prophet ﷺ said, Allah Azza wa Jalla says, I'm with a servant according to what they expect of me. So we should reflect on those things. This is a very serious time to do that. And if we do that, we hope Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will, remove these difficulties from us and make it a lesson. And because that's the other thing, once the trial and tribulation is lifted, where do we go from there? If we become obedient now and we do dhikr now, but then afterwards you go back to nothing like this normal, because at some point in time the trial will be lifted. That's also not an appropriate thing. Maybe we should think about that these masajid that are now closed, next time Allah graciously allows them to be open for us, and we should spend more time in them. And when we're in them, we should be very careful that the only thing we do is remember. So I'll just leave it at that because we said we'd make it quick. If there's any questions, inshallah, you can, forward them. Inshallah.
Thank you, Brother Dickinson, for all the detail and hadith. There is a one question from Adil. Adil, go ahead for your question. I'm gonna unmute you. Go ahead, Adil.
Ji, Assalamu alaikum.
So,
my only question is, like you mentioned, like different like states of the masjid here are different masajids. So it can be like we are implying that it can be a punishment from Allah, but it's everywhere. It's not like on this masjid or that masjid. It's
right. I don't think anyone should imply that it's a punishment. However, well, I mean, ultimately, like the Prophet and I mentioned, a ta'un, the plague is a punishment. Okay, so but it's like I mentioned before, we don't have access to that type of. This is Ilm al-Mafqud, as Imam Tahawi says. There's no way for us to really know for sure whom Allah is punishing and whom He's not. Okay, you understand my point? So, but however, maybe it's just something to reflect upon, that we're getting emotional about not being able to go to masajid right now because many masajids are closing, and this by the directive of many scholars, not just one or two, but a lot. So we get emotional about it, but I think that instead of getting emotional about it, think about the fact that perhaps maybe what we're being taught too is that the masjid has a purpose, and this is just something to reflect upon, and not really saying that it's a punishment. But a lot of the masajids that we see, we're not using them, the platform as what we use them for is something other than remembering Allah, for the most part. Illa mashallah, for the most part. People use it, and I didn't want to make specific, let's say, I don't want to specify what I meant by that, but as an example, for political purposes, for social purposes, we have to start to understand that that's not the role of the masjid. The role of the masjid primarily, right? It's primarily to remember Allah. It's primarily to worship Allah. Not that the community doesn't need to talk about politics or have a social, social functions, but that's for the most part, that's what we see, and we don't see much of the remembrance of Allah. Perhaps maybe once this is trial, let's put it that way, is lifted from us, we can make more effort to make our massages more along that line, face the dhikr and ibadah, and not so much these other things. Wallahu a'lam. You know what I'm saying?
It's more like self-reflection, so we should like do it on our own, something like that.
Yes, okay. Exactly. It has nothing to do with others so much as it is just for ourselves, just to think about these things, that whenever a blessing is removed from you, you should always think about it after that, that perhaps I didn't really show the gratitude, because the in shakartum azidannakum, if you show gratitude, Allah will give you more. If something's being taken away from you, it might be a sign that the proper gratitude was not given. So, then we should make dua to Allah in that respect. Like if we ask for, part of the things that we should ask for amongst protection from this trial is that, please protect our houses of worship, and let it be that we can go back to them. And that when we go back to them, we will treat them with more respect and be more mindful of what their purpose is. Does that make sense?
Yep, it does.
Thank you. Anyone else has any question? Just ping me and I'll unmute. Okay, my Brother Shah has a question. Let me unmute Brother Shah. Give me 1 sec. All right.
I saw the question. Does the punishment?
Sure.
The answer is actually yes, but we're going to have to get into a little bit of detail. The problem with thinking about how the adab of Allah works is that it doesn't always. It's not always clear. My family the other day was like certain people in my family don't like Trump much, so they were thinking that maybe he'll get it. And I thought to myself, that's not the way it works. Probably he won't get it. Probably he'll never be touched by it. There's a way Allah works that people like that probably won't go through anything. There is a difference there. So but we're not responsible to always pinpoint. Okay, that's what I meant earlier too about mentioning these things. Like, yes, in general, any hardship is in some reality a form of adab. For those, as the Prophet ﷺ mentioned very clearly, hatta shawka, even a thorn prick, for those who believe in him and are patient, that adab, if you will, is kafara. Adab, actually, in its linguistic meaning, is simply put, it's any discomfort, any type of pain that you're put through. So from a linguistic point of view, anything that we don't like in terms of these things, pestilence and diseases and sicknesses, all of that, of course, because who wants to go through it? Who likes it? And it's painful. So just the linguistic meaning of adab itself is exactly that. So yeah, these things are adab. Now, why does Allah give it, and to whom Allah gives it? There, you have to be, there's more detail to that question. So, but in brief, yes, there is a difference. Absolutely. How Allah handles those who believe in Him and how Allah handles those who don't, in every respect.
Okay, great. Thank you. Anyone else has any question? All right. Brother Asim is joining. Just one more moment.
Hey, Brother Ahmad,
Yes, Yawar.
this is Yawar.
Yeah.
Did you guys record it? Because most of the people didn't even get the link in the group, so they were scrambling for it, and I think I even got it like very late. Did
Okay.
you
Yeah. I'm recording. Yes, I'm recording. I'll share. Once I have this MP, I'll upload somewhere and share it with everyone.
Okay, sounds good. Jazakallah.
Jazakallah. Okay. Anyone has any question before I close the call? Close this meeting.
So we will have a class Sunday, the regular time, right?
Yeah.
11 o'clock.
Yeah, Brother Arif, I'll confirm that, inshallah. I'll confirm that, yeah. But any question regarding this current situation, coronavirus, and what should we be doing? Anything regarding that? Okay, I believe we have no more questions. Thank you, Brother Dickinson. Really appreciate it. Thank you,
Make
everyone.
dua for everyone.
Yeah, make dua for everyone. Thank you, guys. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Right.